Hi, folks. Welcome back to another episode of PT Outcast. I'm Carly, and in this episode, Eric and I had some repeat guests, Elise Ruckert and Libby Krause, back to talk about all things related to belonging. This was such a fun episode, and I feel like my mind was blown for multiple reasons, many aha moments, and really cool that we are kind of all distance faculty, but have different experiences of belonging. So, what do you think, Eric? What was an aha moment for you in this
Yeah, it was
episode?
a good conversation. And, it was like one of those conversations I felt like I personally just had a little bit of trouble getting into the first couple minutes of like where we were going to go. But then by the end, we were like stuck in this conversation. And I feel like it was really hard to put the brakes on and say, like, oh man, we've been talking for an hour. So I liked it because it felt like it just built momentum as we went. I think we started with this lens of like distance faculty and talking about the unique needs of distance faculty. And of course, belonging isn't a unique need, but how you have to work to create that belonging. That was fascinating to kind of think through that and to dig into like what are the finer concepts of like how distance faculty differ from in residence faculty.
Yeah, it was so interesting. And we all had a slightly different angle in the way that some of us had, with the institution where we all connected, had way more time and experience built already versus like you, on the other hand, you were like first full-time distance faculty without a connection before. So really brought up some interesting perspectives in terms of what builds belonging in a community. So that was really neat. And I also had my mind blown when I learned that some people don't want to belong. And I'm like, oh my goodness, all I want is belonging. This is crazy to me. So that was a really interesting moment for me when Elise kind of brought that up.
Yeah, I remember when she first like showed that data that I saw it was, I don't know when she learned it, but whenever I first saw it, it was at it might have been CSM maybe last year, and it was a graph, and there was this like four quadrant graph, and there was this person, this one corner that people didn't want to belong. And I too had a little hard time thinking about that. I'm like, okay, so loners, like, but I guess some people just like that isolation. That's their value. That's their thing. And it's something that's really hard for me to understand. But yeah, it's important to also like not force your view on everybody.
Not forced belonging because someone might be good where they're at. And so, yeah, very, very interesting. I think just learning about these different aspects. And we also talked a little bit, which I thought was really neat, about the four frames of kind of in viewpoints for. You probably can define these a little better than I can because you did define them in the podcast. But the four frames that are helping us, think about perspectives of how things are being viewed.
Yeah, yeah, looking at like what builds change or organizational structure. It's just a way to analyze things. So that was kind of a neat thing to go through. And I guess to me, what was really valuable for me, just personally about this podcast, was I like you're very extroverted. I sometimes code switch between introverted and extroverted. It depends on like kind of day where I am, what's going on. But Libby is like decidedly and genuinely an introvert. And hearing her talk about how she views some of these connection things differently, that was really interesting for me. And I felt like I know her a lot better after having that conversation. So
Yeah, it was neat. It's sort of, I love how she framed it. She's like, I don't want a network. I want the relationship that's like four steps after the
yeah,
networking.
right,
And I'm like, oh, that
exactly.
makes total sense. I get that. You want to have them a deeper connection. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
So,
we
and,
talked
and
about,
I guess the fun thing, the hook here, if you want a hook for the episode, is we talked about workload, faculty workload, related to belonging and connecting. So we came up with some really innovative models for faculty workload. So we want to make sure that if you're a program director, you definitely plug into this and you absolutely assign the new workload model that we developed because I'm sure it's just going to work for everybody.
it's
So
going to be perfect. It's going to be
it'll be
great. So
perfect. It'll be perfect. Yeah. So, all right.
awesome.
Well, great. It was a good time and let's get to it. And thanks for listening to PT Outcast. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to PT Outcast. We're here with another episode of collaboration with Trellis Ed with Libby Krause and Elise Ruckert, and of course, here and with Carly Lockola. And we're going to continue our discussion. Last time in a couple episodes ago, we talked about all things related to education and faculty development. And today we're going to talk a little bit about distance teaching and what it feels like to be a hybrid faculty or a distance-based faculty member and how that's a little different and has some pros and some cons. But we're going to try to take this into a constructive direction and talk about what can we think about in our profession from systemic and organization levels, and even personal levels too, about distance teaching and how we can grow this like ever burgeoning sector of our academic body and the profession into a really productive group of people that feels like they belong and that feels like they're contributing really positively to the profession even though they're at a distance. And so, you know, one of the things to know first of all is that Elise is really smart about this. It's part of her dissertation. So you worked on this concept of belonging, which is not all of the things that I want to talk about, but is a really important thing about what I want to talk about. And maybe that's a good place to start. So if you wouldn't mind just kind of talking a little bit about what you did in your work and how you define belonging. What is that? Just give kind of the overview to kick us off, if you would.
Yeah, for sure. So I think as healthcare providers, we all naturally have this kind of inclination toward connecting with people, right? And helping people. And it wasn't until I started doing my EDD that I realized there was actually a whole construct and a whole body of literature and psychology around this idea of belonging. And so belonging is feeling of being recognized, of being valued, of being supported and included in one's environment. And there's a lot of literature looking at belonging in education, specifically for students. So there's a lot looking at belonging in primary education, secondary education, and even in undergraduate education. I think it's starting to grow in the graduate sector of things, but I was really interested in belonging as it related to faculty.
Mm.
And this has really not been studied as much. There is some preliminary literature that suggests faculty that feel belonging show up to the classroom differently, and students have some better outcomes looking
Mm.
over the course of a semester in terms of their own learning and retention of material. And so I really wanted to take that a step further and explore this specifically in the hybrid setting where people, right, are relying on virtual technology in addition to face, or have the ability to also form relationships face to face when they're in immersions. And so, yeah, that's kind of what belonging is. And I was really interested in it because I was a hybrid faculty member. I knew there wasn't that much, or I found there wasn't much literature on it, and felt this was a place that maybe I could contribute to the profession.
Yeah, that's great. So good on you for bringing in, kind of cross pollinating psychology stuff in a different way into PT, right? So, let's kind of then like add another piece of our foundation to this conversation, which is like distance faculty.
Mhm.
So all of us have had time being distance faculty. As a matter of fact, we almost started the podcast too early before we hit record because we started talking about what our entry points were into distance teaching. So,
Yeah.
uh, Libby, you kind of mentioned that you felt like you were quasi distance, maybe. Is that a right interpretation of that?
Yeah, I was speaking of belonging, like I feel like I'm somewhere in between the sort of these residential faculty that we have that are in person and all of our at a distance faculty, because I started in this role when I did live in the Bay Area, Northern California, and was truly at a distance. And then I continued this role now that I'm actually back in area. And
Hmm.
so I am often sort of tapped to do some residential stuff here and there. I have the opportunity to like go to anything, the holiday party, the homecoming, whatever, I have access to those things if I want to go, which I'm very aware is different from when I didn't live here. And you did kind of feel left out of those things a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. So Carly, how about you? What was your hybrid? Always hybrid?
So just residency was the one time where I wasn't, right? That was my sort of intro to teaching at USC was during my neuro residency. But then I moved to Portland where I am now. And it was a couple years before there was a hybrid pathway. And then once it started, I was able to I kind of stay connected, looped back in. And for me, it was interesting because I started as an adjunct, right? So I was doing one course and then started to pick up more courses as the time went. But with one course, and I didn't go to USC for PT school. My only real people I knew for the most part were the neuro folks, right? So there's a lot of faculty at USC I didn't know. And I also didn't realize in the beginning that, I could go to faculty meeting or some of these virtual things that existed. And so it took a little bit to feel like connected, I would say. But then once I started going to those things, I started to feel like, okay, like I am a little bit more part of this community here. And I've been at a distance, and my classes that I was teaching in did not have lab components. So I did not need to ever come down to campus. I would, for faculty retreat from time to time, but otherwise I've been pretty much remote.
Yeah. Yeah. And,
Yeah.
and Elise, you sort of also quasi maybe.
Yeah, because like Carly, I had done a residency at USC and I actually stayed in LA and worked as an adjunct and then came on as clinical faculty for about 4 years before coming back to the East Coast, and then worked on the East Coast for 7 years and then went back to USC. Was really excited about the hybrid pathway and was really intrigued about how it would work. I think what's really interesting when you think about being part of a team is also thinking about the size of the faculty and the size of
Yeah.
the program, right? Because one of the reasons why I left my first institution was that it was really big, 100 plus students, huge faculty. And so I think that you can find your niche and you can find your people, but feeling like an integral, recognized part can be hard and really takes time. And when I moved to a smaller program, I felt like it was really easier to make some of those connections and feel like an integral part of an environment. And then I think that eased my transition going back to USC for my online or for the for the hybrid role. Because I did have some of these connections, ahead of time, and then could grow them and nurture them remotely and in person.
Yeah. Yeah. So for me, it's different. I have several instances where I've joined faculty as the distance person and always have been the distance person. Right. So that goes back even to when I started at Texas State University. I think it was like 2008 or 2009. I did some distance teaching for them, lecture by lecture. And then when I finally moved there, I had already kind of been familiar with people. People got to know me a little bit. Um, when I went to Regis University, there was also some teaching, some visits that I had made, some lecturing on campus. I was a distance person. But what's interesting is I've gone to places to be a distance faculty member when they didn't have infrastructure for distance faculty. And so those places are very residential. I went to University of Texas, El Paso, and I think I only went to one faculty meeting in all of the years that I was there teaching, which was several. And it wasn't because they were excluding me or anything. It's just the systems don't work that way, right? That was, probably 2014-ish or so when I started doing that work. And so Zoom didn't exist, right? And people didn't have faculty meetings virtually. When I went to USC, I was their first distance-based faculty. And so part of what I've been doing in my role is to help faculties and systems try to understand how to include people and how to pay attention to those things that make it accessible.
Yeah, I heard that a lot in my dissertation research, where I did qualitative interviews with 16 faculty across the country that had at least a year in a full-time hybrid role, like full-time core faculty role that had a hybrid component. And it was really interesting to hear the stories from individuals that were part of a hybrid only, like they only had one pathway, versus a situation where there was both residential and hybrid components, because this feeling of being the other or of othering, right, was always an inherent part of, the interactions and the discussion. There was always just something that was a little different between them versus others compared to what you're talking about, Eric, which is this idea of how do we really help include, have shared decision making, have opportunities for connection that are, supporting individuals who are at a distance.
Sure. I said this term a little while ago, and I'll say it again here in the podcast now that we're actually recording all this good stuff. We should just hit record right away, but we're talking about, instead of just giving tasks, giving power.
Mm.
Yeah. So power would be things like assigning people into leadership roles in teaching, right? Putting people on committees, putting people in like directorial and management administrative roles who are hybrid. And of course, this applies to schools that have a residential and a hybrid pathway, which is, a little bit of the minority, honestly. So I think in some sense, schools that are all hybrid have this added advantage because those structures are automatically built in for them.
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. And words that come to mind as you're talking for me are this idea of when you share or assign power, now you have a feeling of trust, right? People
Yeah.
trust me to do good work. People are recognizing I have this professional expertise, the whole area of collegiality of, oh, wait a minute, people are valuing what professional expertise I bring and how I can then share that with others. And I think that's really important as you're talking about that, Eric.
Yeah, as somebody who's gone into these roles as distance person, that's probably the thing I felt the most is like it takes a while to build trust when you're at a distance. When you're in with somebody in the room and like I don't know if there's pheromones, they can sense when you're sweating, when you're stressed, or I don't know what it is, but it takes a while to build that trust up when you're at a distance because people just are a little unsure of who exactly they're dealing with.
Yeah, and what I heard from faculty, sorry, I'm like all excited to share,
This is the
my
point. This is the point.
research.
Keep going. Yeah.
What I heard from faculty were things like my program director has an open calendar and I can sign up for a meeting whenever I want to be able to talk out, projects or ideas, or I have a regular standing meeting with other people on the faculty. So I have these regular points of, connection and building a relationship. And then the other piece that I heard a lot was this idea of self advocacy, that you have to kind of show up and advocate yourself for yourself and put yourself out there. And Libby, I think you have helped me so much with this idea of like showing up authentically and letting your true self come out in a virtual world that can be hard, right? But how are you using the microphone or maybe the chat in these meetings to allow parts of yourself to come out and to shine, which feels like more explicit, like you're having right to like work at it, but
Mhm.
it's so important to be intentional that way.
Yeah, I mean, I'm definitely a make a little side joke to the person sitting next to me person. And so, yeah, having the chat as a place to do that it does feel more vulnerable because you're putting it out there in the case of faculty meeting, right, to like 50 people rather than one. But I do, I get, I think, a lot of good feedback and other people sort of, chuckle or respond in a way that makes it feel like you're actually there. So, yeah. And you know what I'm remembering, Eric?
Mm,
Is that back in 2019, we did our like at a distance faculty coffee hours.
yeah,
Remember that?
I do.
And I took the lead on that, which is wild because
Yeah,
that
like I
is
didn't
not
know
my
until
usual
until
role.
recently how introverted you were. Like, because I thought I was like, oh, she's a party planner.
No, but I think so I think that kind of thing, right? Where we had this coffee hour set up where it was literally we just opened a Zoom room and we drank our coffees and chatted. It was very valuable for me to get to know the other at a distance faculty for sure, especially people that I didn't know like you, Eric. But it doesn't bridge the gap between the at a distance and the in-person residential faculty as much. So it sort of in some way it's great, but in some ways sort of reinforces this like we are something different.
Yeah, yeah,
Even though like we are something different and we have different needs and different things we want to talk about.
yeah. I mean, that's absolutely valid too, right? It's there's some places where they're the same, and then there's some unique things happening. I guess, Carly, what I'm interested in from your perspective is you talked about being, a resident, and then you became adjunct, and so you really defined yourself as a new faculty member from a distance. How did it feel to you? How did you feel like you got this like sense of value from everybody else? What were the systems that you leveraged to like plug in?
To plug it, sure. Well, so I think starting to come to the like and attend opportunities that were available, right? So if it was, coming to faculty meeting because it was not mandatory, so like I started to go to those just to kind of have a pulse on what's going on, and that was actually hugely helpful because it's like then you just are kind of getting an update and sort of what's happening in the division, what's going on, what are the broader things that we're worried about, or and I think that was one thing that helped. I think as I started to teach more courses and then met new people, like new faculty, and like began to have closer relationships, because if you think about like with your your course leadership team, you're meeting weekly during the semester to kind of plan out or talk, to recap, think about and plan what's coming up next. So that actually was a really great place too to kind of have community building, because you end up having like, you talk a little bit before you get started in the meeting, like we did today, just kind of like, how was Halloween? How, the exchanging pleasantries. And so that kind of starts to happen. And then as I picked up more courses, that was happening with more people. So then I felt like my network was growing. But I think taking the opportunities that were available to like go to extra things, right? So it is extra time, it's extra investment that I was cultivating to really feel that sense of belonging. But once I kind of knew I wanted to have more of a focus on education rather than being in the clinical space, it's like, okay, I have to invest this time. So it's worth it, even if this is not like paid time for me, to kind of feel like I'm belonging. So I think that was the big piece. And then it happens again when you move into a leadership position in a course, because then all of a sudden now there are more meetings that you're going to that are just for leadership, and like, and like the leadership team to plan out the semester. And so it starts to kind of snowball once you insert yourself into enough places. And then I also just tried to like show up as my authentic self. I think I've always, anytime we've been close to Halloween, I'm wearing a costume to faculty meeting or whatever. And I'm like, I'm going to do it because it's fun. And like, just like little things like that showcase a little bit of who I am too, for those who don't know me.
Yeah, I think Carly tried to show up today a few days after Halloween in a costume, but we sent her back to the drawing board.
I would have. We could have said if we recorded on Halloween. But
yeah, no, I think that a really important thing you mentioned there is sort of this unspoken cost of what it takes to do the work to connect to people when you're at a distance, which is time. It's, it takes energy of cognitive planning and strategy, but there's also this emotional cost about it, right? You have to continually sort of like reach out and put yourself out there and try to find ways to connect to folks. And that can be a little daunting. So any comments on that?
Yeah, it's like it's an active process, right? You have to show up and think creatively about how you can connect with people. I heard people on my study who would take notes, like as they were talking and getting to know people. How many, what's their family situation? Do they have any pets? What kind of hobby? Where did they go on vacation? And then they would use that as an opportunity to like check in and build on later. And this idea, Carly, that like, yes, there's the cost of the time showing up to the meeting, but then you're also talking about, hey, I was looking and I was seeing who else is there and who else can I like chat with or connect with, like on the side, right? You're constantly having to like plan a strategy for cultivating these relationships. And I think this idea of knowing people more than just a colleague, but as a person, right? This idea of relating with other people at a more basic personal level is like the crux of belonging. And that is what I heard so much in my study. It's that these are people that I have connected with personally. They are not just a coworker. They are more than a coworker. And so to feel that belonging over distance, you really have to take advantage of and strategize and prioritize behaviors that are people focused, not just task focused, right?
That's where this belonging work is really powerful, because it spans beyond just like distance-based teaching, right? It's like any organization strives to have their employees feel this sense of belonging. And maybe that's more so with faculty, right? Because that's one of the faculty's jobs, is to like steer and form and have the genesis of thought that is the curriculum and is the program. So that belonging is really critical to the success. But organizations, you can think about this personally, like, yeah, emotional toll. Organizations need to think about it a little bit differently, I think.
Yeah, Libby, I'd be interested in your thoughts on this because, I think about the 4 frames. And I think about how important with these types of programs it is to have a leader that has that relational frame. And that is something that I think I've always valued relationships, but I also really love being task focused and I really love having an agenda and I really love, feeling that sense of accomplishment at the end of the meeting. And what I really learned about leading teams online is you've got to have these chit chat moments. You've got to have like a gentle opener. You can't just launch right into the agenda. And so, yeah, I'd be interested in your thoughts on that. The 4 frames. We're talking about Bowman and Deal's 4 frames here.
Yeah, Bowman and Deal's 4 frames. You're putting me on the spot too to remember what they all are. They They symbolic. I always remember that one because it's the one that I do not relate to or that I've had bad experiences with. And
There's structural, right?
structural, thank you.
And
Yep.
Political.
And human
And
resource.
human resources. Yes, thank you. And I think a lot of so this idea is that there's like 4 different ways to look at any organizational change or any conflict or anything that comes up in an organization, and that ideally you would try to approach everything considering all 4 frames. I think generally people in big time leadership positions often thinking about structural things like keeping everything to the book and making sure we're crossing all our T's and dotting our I's.
And then human resources, making sure everybody has the same allocation of these things, right?
Yeah, exactly. Versus, I think often the lower level or even mid-level employees, and I think especially in the structure that we're talking about, adjunct faculty, are often really craving this sort of for people to see the human resources sort of side of anything that's happening. And so I think considering all of these things, I am not good at the sort of political side of, knowing the right people and making sure that I maintain those connections. And I think you can apply these 4 frames in terms of your own, how do I approach and get the most out of this role that I'm in? And so, knowing which ones you sort of tend towards and nurturing that, but then also sort of bolstering up the frames that you don't tend towards so much. But the other thing that I think about a lot is the symbolic piece. Like, I think sometimes you can have a really bad experience in that way. Like, sorry, everything's going to whatever, but here's a pizza party, and like that's not great, right? But I also think there are lots of ways where it can be great. So the USC typical example is the Trojan family, right? That is a huge symbol that has its pros and its cons, but lots of pros. And so I often try to find things like that I can do to create like sort of rituals or for lack of a better word, like logos, right? That can bring people together, like summer camp style almost, right? Like this is a thing we do. But those things don't just come up organically as easily as they do when you're in person in the same place.
It's nice to think about the different frames, and you're giving people a roadmap here for something to learn about, right? Like go learn about these frames and figure out where your acumen is, right? You're saying, okay, well, I can focus. I probably need to put more energy on this political part, right? So it's a nice kind of tie into our previous conversation about faculty development, right? Giving yourself some education about leadership can give you some tools to help you generate that personal side of the belonging thing and help you try to find ways to reach out so it's not so onerous, doesn't seem so daunting all the time. For me, the framing that I'm best at is photographic framing. So outside of that, I don't know if I'm good at anything, but that I'm pretty good at. So, but it doesn't help to make connections unless the thing I'm talking about is my photos.
It's also helpful to note, I think, other people's frame, and even this, right? I'm gonna take your lead here, Eric. But like knowing where other people are coming from and being able to use that as your in, right? So like, Eric, you have photography. I have like a music background. Sometimes we talk arts, right?
Yep.
And like that's an in. But even more than that, right? Knowing that your leadership really value structure and politics, for example, you can use that as an in to come around to, but we really need to like spend a little bit more time in the human resources area because people are feeling unappreciated, for example.
Yeah, fascinating. I think the structural component of these frames is something that is hard to overcome if it doesn't exist, right? All those other things, like if you're talking about distance faculty. And one of the things that comes in my mind is about scholarship, right? So when you're in person, you have labs, you have people, you're bumping into things. It always felt to me like that was much easier as a residential faculty than it was as a distance faculty. I think you have to come up with a whole different structural framework for how to approach scholarship.
Yeah, no, I'd agree because it's someone that was like wanting to get involved with scholarship, but trying to figure out like, okay, I can't go volunteer in a lab. What
Mhm.
opportunities are there? And so it looks different, right? I helped out with a systematic review. I'm helping out with another systematic review because it's like I can do that from where I am, or depending on, I mean, I think at USC and like all your work, Elise, with ESRL, which like it is like education research, right? So like that's something that I was able to kind of because it was a virtual meeting. So awesome, I can be here, I can attend this, I can be present. So, but finding those moments, it took me a minute to find like what was my lens going to be, knowing that I wanted to contribute somehow, but was not sure what opportunities there were.
Yeah, and even with all of I think the growth and momentum around educational scholarship, I do still think that in some cases there's a bit of a difference in allocation of value and of resources toward the educational scholarship, you know, lab and initiatives compared to the other kind of more traditional, clinical arm or bench, bench kind of lab work. And so, even there, right, that's another place for distance faculty, if they're gravitating toward that part of scholarship, are needing to advocate and are needing to put in this extra like time and effort to form these groups and then to try to get those resources from higher up. Yeah, where it is a little more challenging. Although I will say it's really exciting to see things like Gamer that is now, really being promoted by the profession as helping to develop educational scholars across health professions and help to establish these cross professional teams. There's, educational research aspects of ACAPT. There's, SIGs in the Academy of Education. There was one more thing I was going to mention, but I'm not remembering that right now, which is fine. But yeah, I think it's great, Eric, that you brought up this idea of scholarship because yeah, it's tough. It's tough. And we all have to work together to try to meet the expectations, right?
Yeah. So, and I kind of felt like you kind of defaulted to like, okay, well, distance should be like educational research. That's a really easy way to do it, but it doesn't have to be the only way to do it, right? So,
Mhm.
I've been part of research groups that have functioned at a distance that have done like clinical outcomes research. And, so there's a lot of ways to do it, but it does take like a different working mindset. And it honestly takes inertia from other people wanting to do that same work, right? Because you think about what are you trying to replace that's on campus? What happens? So on campus, Carly's doing this research. She's in her lab doing this stuff, and she and I meet for coffee and we talk about it. And I see her in the hallway the next day, and she's telling me about it. And so she's talking about this thing, and so I become invested. I know about it now. I know what to ask her, how to talk, and then suddenly a collaboration forms. At a distance, you have these like poignant moments, like okay, I'm running into this person in the elevator at a conference, right? Now we have to work really hard to find another time to intersect at that same conference. Maybe I'll see them a few months later at another conference. Maybe we need to set up a Zoom meeting. They're all like really overt efforts to make sure you're finding those points to connect with people that will then cultivate the uh the symbiosis that is something working together that's going to cause research collaboration.
Yeah. And the dialogue between you and people in your network, right? Like at ELC, Carly's texting me about things that are making her think about mentorship or about belonging. And she's maybe telling me the name of authors, or Dee Dee, is doing the same thing. And it's like, how are you finding people and sharing your interests so others are aware and can then do the linking up and the help to really develop that? And I do think that distance team management is challenging, right? So it's about having regular meetings on the calendar every week or every other week that are forcing accountability before teammates. It's the idea of having a deadline, having people that are really doing the work to show up and do their due diligence. And it can be really easy to let projects die off if it's just like, oh, it's really busy right now. And I can think of like, two or three where that has happened with. And so I'll just say, it really takes a lot of discipline, to keep
Mm.
all of the balls in the air, right? As an academic faculty member, right? Scholarship, teaching, service, all the things. It's just so hard.
Yeah, so I guess that's an interesting way to look at it. And maybe one of the things when I think about broadly, does the profession value distance faculty as much as they value in-person faculty? And I don't know that we collectively have the ability to answer that question, but it's a question that I always have in my mind, right? Because even though there's a growing number of distance programs, you still have probably 80% of the faculty in the United States are going to be residential faculty. So in that context, distance faculty are the newcomers, right? They're the others still, probably for a while. That's my guess anyway.
I think that's fair.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
but if we could share this experience, this is part of why I wanted to talk about this today, was to say, listen, it's not just I get to work from home as a distance faculty, right? It takes a lot of discipline, it takes a lot of professionalism, it takes a lot of expertise, which is important for people who are residential faculty to know, but also really important for people who are considering being a distance faculty to know.
Absolutely. And having mentors that are there supporting you and how to fulfill all of these, areas and expectations and who are following up with you. I mean, I think I would have really struggled in my current role if I had not had prior academic experience with mentors who really taught me what it means to be an academic faculty member and really helped me understand the unspoken aspects of that, like the hidden agenda or whatever behind that, in addition to what CAPTI says and what the university is expecting for promotion and tenure. It's hard.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I should next time I have to negotiate a workload, maybe I should incorporate time to make connections.
Yeah. I mean, seriously, but it is related to work performance, retention of employees, less sick days. It is related to improved job satisfaction, which helps with mental health, physical health. I mean, the ramifications of belonging are huge. I mean, if you want to go down the loneliness path of like all the challenges with that, with cardiovascular health and mental health, I mean, I think, Eric, we could, and Libby and Carly, we could really come together and set the importance of distance faculty really do need a % effort related to this whole piece.
Okay, so the add-on to next time I negotiate, I'm going to have workload for that. I'm going to hire you as my negotiator because that was an impassioned plea.
Man.
Yeah. So, I guess Libby and Carly, what's your idea about like what's the effort involved in your brains to connect on a regular basis? High, low, like
Interesting.
Libby, you're
Yeah.
introverted, so maybe high. Carly, you're not, so maybe it flows a little better.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, I love any moment to connect, and I am like pretty extroverted, so I enjoy those moments. But I will say, I think the low, like this, I'm not teaching this semester, right? So the feeling of connection is a lot less for me and I'm like, oh, I need to actively make those things. So like that realization I just had recently of like, okay, since I'm not teaching, I'm not having those weekly touch points. I actually have to set things up myself and like connect with people on my own. And like, so I have a call scheduled for Friday with someone I haven't like connected with as much. And I'm like, great, we're going to do that. And so having to take the initiative on my own to like find those times super important, I think. And it is taking, like, I had to have the moment of like, oh, that's why I feel a little bit like a little lonely this semester because I'm not having those meetings. Like, so I have to make them myself so that it doesn't happen. And I am having to make them, right? It's not just being served up to me. Although I'm like, let's do the coffee hour again. Let's start that up again. I want to do that so that it's like I have a little space where I can show up and then it's like, kind of built in. So I think it's maybe medium amount of mental load, kind of thinking about that of like, I need to stay connected. I want to have these things, but yeah.
And now I see why you have this idea of this Brainsmith live office hour where everyone just comes, hangs out. Like you're not teaching this semester.
Exactly.
You're feeling a little lonely. You're like, I'm making a meeting for everyone to come to.
I want to pull people in. And then also, I mean, I think before I had the realization of like, I should go to all these meetings, I would have, loved to have a coffee hour or something that was like, this is the place where I can go and just like meet other people in my situation. Cause I think we've been spoiled at USC in the way that there just have been a lot of opportunities for connections like this. And I feel like other adjuncts are maybe, and I can't, again, I don't work at other places, institutions, so I can't speak to what it's like, but I do feel like there are possibly less opportunities for connection in the way that we have had. So yeah, wanting to have that space for folks.
Yeah, in general, I'll say like my perspective is that the more complex the organization, the more opportunities for connection, right? Like I was talking to somebody who was from Duke and they're saying there's so many things going on all the time at Duke that there's like, you have to avoid connection almost, right? Like you're dodging it. So
You have to prune.
yeah, which is great, right? That's what makes it one of the best programs. USC has a lot of connection opportunities, but there's other schools that where there's not that, right? It's a small faculty, it's a tiny group, it's maybe just the PTE program is on an island, and so those connection things that speaks to kind of the structural thing. But I want to come back to Libby there. I think you have something to say. Yeah.
Yeah, I think you're segueing a little bit into something that I've been thinking about, which is, there's a lot happening in secondary education right now. And I think a lot of full-time faculty are busier than ever.
Mhm.
And so there's this like added barrier of, I want to reach out to have a meeting just to hang out, right? Just because I don't get to touch base with you in the hallway, but I know you're really busy. So I think it's just like added this little bit of like, I don't know if I
Yeah.
feel comfortable reaching out to that person for that kind of thing right now, which I think is unfortunate. But it also, if you're out there listening and you are a full-time in-person faculty member with remote people that you connect with, like reach out to them because they might be not feeling like they should reach out to you at this time.
Yeah, I want to propose something that is going to be earth-shattering. I know. Yeah.
Let's go.
Here it is.
I'm ready.
Meetings don't have to be 30 minutes or 1 hour. Yeah.
Wait.
You can schedule a 7-minute meeting if you wanted to.
Elise and I have a meeting that starts at 15 past the hour.
What are you doing?
I know.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. So, I think it's a silly little thing, right? But like I sometimes do that. We'll just schedule somebody like 15 minutes or less because I know I just need a check-in and it's going to be over. And it just helps my mental like clarity about how packed my schedule is to just schedule like a brief, even if I, normally touch in like checkpoint 30 minutes. No, too long, right? Think about if I'm going to hang out and talk to you for a minute at like, the lunchroom or whatever the water cooler is, that I'm not going to spend half hour talking to you there. So maybe I should not book half-hour meetings all the time.
Yeah, I mean, I had a friend telling me this was last year, I think, that the New York Times had an article about you only need 7 minutes to gain the benefits, the psychological benefits of connection. So call a friend, 7 minutes, and that's all you need. And this is making me think about how maybe some of this is being framed around, oh, it's social and it's, maybe almost being approached as like not work. But I just want to emphasize that these kind of conversations, like what we're doing right now, it's the informal conversations can be really ripe for generation of scholarship ideas or new teaching ideas, or, oh, I want to go read that book related to my expertise that I didn't even know about or think about. And so these are actually really productive and healthy ways for us to engage in our work. And I think that Dee Dee has told me many times that is work. This coming
Dee Dee
together
Matthews. Yeah, talking about Dee Dee Matthews.
Sorry. Dee Dee Matthews. I think Jim Gordon says the same thing. This power of setting up meetings within your network, that it's not all just, about keeping a friendship. It's about, again, thinking more broadly, keeping a pulse on what's going on in the profession and nationally that can affect your work. And that's really important. And I have one more quick thing. I wanted to go, ooh, I have something. So when you were talking about this idea of having complex organizations, having a lot of opportunities for connection, I heard this in my study too, where people were saying, or faculty were saying how beneficial it was for them to establish connections outside of their department.
Yeah.
So they valued when universities had open research hours where you come and you log into a room and everyone just works on research for an hour, but the first 10 or 15 minutes is just like collegial chat. Or, hey, there's an opportunity for me to be involved on this committee, and the start of the committee is just talking and chatting. Like, this idea of developing connections outside of just your department does support broader feeling of belonging within your role. So don't underestimate, that idea of developing yourself outside of just your department's role.
Yeah, it's almost like I'm thinking about this idea of the belonging and the work about connections. It's sort of like feeding your work brain, right? Like you have to stop and have breakfast every day. Well, maybe not breakfast. I don't know. At some point you breakfast, but you have to eat at some point. But your brain needs to eat too. Like your work brain needs to eat. And so this is sort of like self-care for that role in your life as an employee, as a faculty member. Sort of how I'm thinking about it.
Yeah.
One thing that's coming to mind for me too is like, for lack of a better term, this sort of pyramid scheme of networking where you meet someone or you run into someone in the hallway, which means that when they are in another conversation, they think of you and they say, oh, actually, Eric, I ran into Eric in the hallway and he's actually really interested in this. There's this big web of networking that happens. And so not only with remote faculty are you like having to work for those first connections, but each of those connections would have led to some big web, right? And so you're missing out really on more than you think. And I think my social style being a little bit different, I think introverted, outgoing introvert, as they call us, is like I connect like on a deep level with people when I get to know them, but the small talk causes me physical pain.
Well, you did just call networking a pyramid scheme. So
I sure did. No, the idea of networking makes me want to crawl under my desk and quit my jobs. But then there's Elise, right? Elise and I met. We didn't know each other at all, despite both having USC backgrounds. We just missed each other. And so we didn't know each other at all when we started working together in the hybrid pathway. And we are now very close. But that took a while for me to feel like it wasn't just like a work robot relationship.
Yeah.
No offense, Elise.
It is funny though that
you're not the robot. I'm the robot.
But it's cool how and you just made me think of something, Libby. So I work with Kristen Leach, who she is now the course director for the neuroscience course that I teach in. And we when I joined, I didn't know her, and so we had formed this Zoom relationship of we're meeting and we're developing activities for neuroscience when it was being translated into the hybrid format. And it turned into just weekly meetings where we're doing stuff and connecting, and then more meetings because we're we didn't finish the work, so let's do it a little more. And we realized we developed it, turned into this nice friendship, and we'd been in a room together once at a conference, and then the next time I saw her I was going to stay at her house because we're friends now. And so it was just so strange, and it wasn't weird. That's the thing, it wasn't weird. It was we have this relationship that we have built completely virtually, for the most part, over the better part of 3 or 4 years. And then fast forward to when I show up at her house, I'm hi, it's me. And it's just it's the same. It's really fun. And so I think there's that piece too, in addition to the work brain. For me, it's also these are my professional friendships too, that have also can turn into real friendships. If that, it's not just, it's more than just it can be more than just the workplace sort of colleague. It can become a lifelong
Thanks for saying
too.
that. Thanks for saying that.
I just think it's neat that you can also do it virtually, so you can connect and you can find really great connection that way.
Yeah, I mean, what a cool world it is, right? We're almost on all four corners of the country right now having this conversation.
We are.
Yeah, it's a neat time to be going. All right, so listen, it's been a good number of minutes. I think we should probably think about pulling this conversation together. So I was kind of thinking of some summary points, of things that I heard us say. So maybe I'll say some summary points and then we'll each kind of respond as a finishing thing, right? So some of the summary points I said was thinking about connection should be intentional and valued, right? You need to put it forefront in your mind as something that you need to work to do. We talked about distributing power in organizations, not just tasks, right? That was one of the things we
Yeah.
talked about. We talked about resourcing and structural components to make sure that there's that system in place, and really get like a good sidebar to that where the 4 frames that we talked about. And then I think we also, not explicitly, not a lot, but we did talk about mentorship. And I think that mentorship was part of that connection. And then we did also talk about how networking might just be a pyramid scheme.
You
So
saved
that's
the
up
most
for
important
debate.
last.
Yeah.
Thank
So
you.
all right, yeah, let's everybody come on with their last take about this conversation. So we'll start with you, Elise.
So I'm going to like pivot a teeny bit and just say, but we also have to be cognizant that belonging is not a value for all people. In
Yeah.
fact, Keshri Naidu wrote a piece in Jopdi, an editorial about how some students don't want to belong, right? Some faculty don't want to belong. And we have to be understanding of people who value unbelonging, right?
Yeah.
And so we want the belonging and social connection for people that feel distressed about being lonely and disconnected. But if people are okay, they're kind of like apathetic, it doesn't have negative consequences, then we don't need to intervene and force, connection for, I don't mean it that way. We don't need interventions to improve belonging for those individuals. But I do appreciate that summary, Eric. Yes, by and large, we want belonging for all the benefits it does for us in work and in personal life.
You gave a presentation one time. You had this cool graph, and the graph was like, I feel like I want to belong, and I don't feel like I belong. I don't want to
Yeah.
belong, and I'm good with that. Yeah, it was a great 4-quadrant graph of that. It's fantastic. Thanks for bringing that perspective. Yeah. Carly, how about you next?
I think so. The thing that the take home that resonates with me the most is just the continuing to foster the connections that you feel like give you life, or give you like that feeling of belonging, and the feeling of like, this builds me up to continue to invest time into this, and it's definitely worth it, I think, to do that. And as someone who like, I do want to belong, I like can't wrap my around around that perspective. I'm like, no, I want to be in the herd. I want to be in the, I want to feel like I have my role in like the flying V of geese. So I think I like finding and seeking out those opportunities for connection. So for those folks out there who maybe are feeling a little less connected, or like a little less like they belong, see what opportunities, the low-hanging fruit exists for you, and like take the risk, just show up, and you might find that it's a really great experience. So
Yeah, great. Thanks. And Libby.
Yeah, I think what I'm thinking about most is just the idea of it being important to reflect and be aware of what is authentic and feels right for you in terms of connecting. So I don't want to connect. Like, that's not what I want. What I want is the thing that happens like 4 steps after that. And so I have to know what's important for me to get there. And, I know about myself that I am best when I have a role in a particular situation. So I can remind myself of what my role is here before I go into that place. But yeah, just being aware of your own style and tendencies, and not trying to do what everybody else is doing necessarily, staying true to that in a way that is going to translate to those deeper connections, just kind of going maybe a different way about it.
Yeah, this theme of authenticity. Love it. Right. I guess the last thing that's in my head is maybe a little nonsensical, but everybody's going to have to tolerate this for a minute. So I was walking, and the past couple days, it's been really like cold here in Augusta, Georgia in the morning, like cold, like 49, not like cold, like real cold, but cool here. And so there's a lot of dew, there's fog, and I have these crepe myrtles that border the pond that I live at. And in the morning, the sun comes up and you can see all the spider webs on the crepe myrtles now, right? There's like probably 1,000 spider webs in each crepe myrtle. They recently lost their leaves, and it's really fantastic. And with this dew, they really stands out. Like the contrast is like perfect for your eyes. And so I've been photographing them and staring at them and thinking about these spider webs. And, I think any spider web is like this amazing thing to me in terms of effort, right? Like, as creepy as I'm so afraid of spiders, but the spider webs, I'm like, wow, this is amazing. But this morning I could see that there were like 3 spider webs that were just one single strand that went from one crepe myrtle all the way to the other. It was like a 30-foot span. And I'm like, how did they do that? Right? One, like, it was up high and went low, so maybe it did the ballooning thing. I don't even know. I think that's not how that works. But at some point, those spiders looked across the gulf and said, I want to connect to those spiders over there or that tree over there. And then they brought a web with them along the journey. And, you know, that connection work, I think, is a little symbolic in my head right now about sort of the work it takes. And so maybe those 2 spiders took a leadership role. I don't know. We can go down the spiraling, art analysis of the. Either way, it was beautiful. I'll post a picture of these spider webs on my Instagram so everybody could go enjoy my banter that way visually. Anyway, great conversation. Thanks for tolerating my spider web nonsense at the end. Always enjoy it. We have another one to go in this setup, and in the next one, we're going to kind of talk about the highs and the lows of PT education right now, which will be a great conversation. So I'll look forward to that. Thank you, everybody. This is another really fun episode of PT Outcast.